Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar. Let's get started. Today we're going to talk about climate action and the role of business. I am Michael McComb, Vice President of Communications and Sustainability at SAP in Greater China, and I'm going to be hosting today and moderating the session. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available for replay. We're going to spend the next 50 minutes or so discussing many different aspects of what a lot of people think is the biggest challenge humanity faces today, climate change. The impacts of climate change are more and more evident. We see record temperatures month after month and year after year, major flooding, extreme storm systems, prolonged drought periods, and wildfires around the world. And beyond the environment, climate change is creating massive economic and social impacts as well. Scientists overwhelmingly agree and say that human activity, particularly from industry, is a significant contributor. But our carbon emissions are far from on track to achieve global goals. And we're running out of time. While government policies are inconsistent and we have consumers who are confused or even in denial, we turn to business. And that is the topic of today's discussion. What is the role of business in taking climate action? I have a fantastic panel of experts with me today who are going to discuss and debate the why, where, and how business can lead the way in the transition to a low carbon economy. The first of my panelists is Donald Choi. Donald is CEO of China Chem Group. China Chem is a leading property developer based in Hong Kong. They are celebrating their 60th anniversary this year. Congratulations. China Chem develops residential, commercial, retail, and industrial buildings. Donald has worked globally as an architect and a developer for over 30 years and is familiar with both public and private projects. He is passionate about the power of design and architecture to empower society. We also have Dr. Guo Peiyuan. Peiyuan is the general manager of Sintao, a leading CSR consulting company in China, and chairman of Sintao Green Finance, which is a founding member of the Green Finance Committee of the China Society for Finance and Banking. Sintao Green Finance is the first climate bonds initiative approved green bond verifier from China. Peiyuan's work focuses on research and practices in CSR and socially responsible investing. Next, Megan Willis. Megan is with Cargill, a 155-year-old global corporation offering food, agricultural, financial, and industrial products. Megan is a sustainability and social impact specialist with expertise in agriculture supply chains in emerging markets. She currently leads sustainability programming in the Asia Pacific region under the Cargill Cocoa Promise, which helps major chocolate brands meet their sustainability commitments while supporting smallholder cocoa farmers to improve their resilience and livelihoods. Rounding us out is Peter Lacey. Peter is a senior MD for Europe, UK, and Ireland with Accenture Strategy. But beginning in a few weeks, Peter will begin a new role as Chief Responsibility Officer and Global Sustainability Services Lead for Accenture. He's going to oversee the integration of sustainability and responsibility into Accenture's client services and their operations. Peter is a respected authority on sustainability and on growth and innovation. And although Peter is now based in London, he has spent a fair bit of time living and working in China. Peter, I know it's early there, so thank you for joining, and thank you, Megan, Peiyuan, and Donald. It is great to have you here. Let me get started with a question to all of you. You know, business is often cast as the culprit in climate crisis, right? The climate action crisis. And you have a handful of fossil fuel companies and energy production companies responsible for a major percentage of global emissions. And then there's industrial production, agriculture, commercial, and residential buildings contributing major amounts as well. My question is, how would you characterize the role of business in climate action, and what's your assessment of corporate action so far? We can start with you, Megan, if you'd like.
Sure. Thank you so much, Michael. Business certainly can't do it alone. I think everyone knows that. We do have a very critical role to play, and we can particularly make significant impact just in improving our own operations. You know, for large businesses like Cargill, the potential is huge. Just our scope 1 and 2 targets for 2025, for example, are the equivalent of removing 270,000 cars off the road. So despite the impact we can have on our own, I really do think the role of business comes in how they can influence others, particularly large corporations. So that's looking beyond your own facilities and logistics, looking at the full life cycle of their products. So that's moving into that scope 3, right? Bringing everyone in the supply chain, along on the journey. So when generally assessing action, I tend to look at those scope 3 goals and question if they're ambitious enough to put pressure on the full chain. So Cargill's scope 3 commitment, for example, takes those 270,000 cars I mentioned just now to 10 million. That takes a lot of work from everyone in our chain. But going beyond goal setting, which I think a lot of companies have done and are on the right track, you really have to consider, how are those pushed outwards? Are they through supplier codes of conduct, for example, and how strictly are they being enforced and captured at all levels? But even if that's all happening, it's the end so what that matters. What do you do with this in terms of continuous improvement? And there, I think it can be difficult to know, because it really depends on reporting and disclosure practices of the businesses, which are in turn driven by government disclosure, investor reporting requirements. So I do think many businesses are on the right track. There's always more to do. It's urgent action needed, but a lot of the actions do take time. And so just seeing that more businesses have set and communicated firm near-term goals with science-based targets, and they are holding themselves accountable, I think that's a very positive sign. Thanks.
That sounds great. Big ambitions there from Cargill. Hey, Yuan, what do you think the role of business is?
Thanks, Michael. I would say that business will play a critical role because only if the major business, if not all, participate in the change of climate change, then we can really complete the transition to a lower carbon economy. And I think it would be interesting to compare this time and the time over 10 years ago. And this time, the low carbon transition and climate change, it's driven largely by the so-called 1.5 or 2 degree scenario, or more specifically by the Paris Accord. And over 10 years ago, it was driven by the Kyoto Protocol. And I always emphasize that in this round, we will probably see a much bigger role for the financial sectors because last time the carbon trading market played a big role. But we also see the disadvantage and the cons of the carbon market. But this time we will see the financial market will work quite a lot on this. So it's really exciting to see how financial sector play a role in these areas.
So, and you're referring to COP26 coming up next year. You anticipate financial services and the financial sector will play a much more meaningful role going forward.
Yeah. Right. Actually, I think that's also what the chairman of our central bank just said, that they want to include climate risk in their policy.
Peter, how are you looking at you're looking across industries, across companies of different sizes. How are you looking at the role of business?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity first, Michael. And I can promise you and my China friends that I didn't just make this office specifically for today's panel. This is, as you said, the legacy of having had such a wonderful time living in Shanghai. And so it really is fantastic to connect with all of the panel and all of the Chinese audience, but also on such an important topic around sustainability and around carbon and climate change. And thank you to you and to SAP for putting together this panel for us to talk about the SDG Ambition project as well, which I want to say a little bit about. I think my key message to start with, and then I'll specifically get into your point about how we think about climate. I think the first thing to say is China's 2060 target and its ambition to truly lead on climate change and carbon are phenomenal. And having spent the time in China, I know how well that will be thought through and planned. And as Pei-Yuan mentioned, everything from the manufacturing sector to the financial services sector to thinking about consumption and production systems. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing for me is to emphasize the role that business and technology can play, not just as a risk management strategy, not just as a regulatory imperative, but also creating new products, new services, opening up new markets, and being a different way to look at growth, sustainable growth. So that's the second thing. Business and technology both need to be and will be at the heart of this journey. And then the third thing I would say is that the work that we've been doing together with you, with SAP globally, but with the United Nations and the UN Global Compact and the SDG Ambition framework that we've put together, I think is a really useful framework that Chinese businesses, both state-owned or multinational or privately held Chinese businesses, I think while it will always need to be adapted to Chinese necessities and Chinese characteristics, I think there's a huge amount there that I think can be leveraged by companies to look at how they integrate sustainability, how they manage carbon and climate change. I think maybe just a couple of other things. I think at the moment, let's also be real. At the moment, the corporate action globally on climate is not enough. Fewer than 44% of global companies are reporting GHG emissions. 30%, 35% of global emissions, I think this picks up on Megan's point, come from just 20 companies, right? So we have a huge opportunity and imperative and obligation, I think, to raise the bar, and a huge opportunity as business leaders. I think you take another example, if the top multinationals and the largest Chinese companies increase their share of renewables by 20%, we'd save 1 billion metric tons of GHG emissions. So it's time for change. This is a CEO and executive board level issue. This is not a sustainability vice president, as important as those roles are. This is, and that's one of my titles, right? So, but this is at the level of CEO. It's the COO, it's the CFO, it's changing systems, it's changing the way we think about measuring performance within businesses, and the time to act is now.
Thank you, Peter. And let me move to Donald. As a CEO, you're in the C-suite, you've got C-suite peers. How are you talking about the role of business?
Well, first of all, I think I would like to echo Megan's view that, we can't do it alone. It needs the involvement of all the stakeholders. And, business can be and has been a cause in climate crisis. I think especially when some businesses operate with only the short-term profit maximization in mind and causing negative externality by exploiting the regulation loopholes and transferring part of the internal business costs to others in the community, say air pollution or contaminated water. But that need not to be the case. I think business can also, be a positive solution, to the climate change issues. For example, at our company, China Chem Group, as a major developer and landlord in Hong Kong, we can support efforts to limit and reduce carbon emission in our buildings by designing more sustainable buildings. Buildings account for about 90% of electricity used in Hong Kong and generate 60% of Hong Kong's carbon emissions. Therefore, by designing and retrofitting our premises with the climate action in mind, we can make significant, meaningful impact. And with many businesses incorporating ESG in their business model, I believe in future, business could be a solution rather than a problem.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you. I didn't know it was as high as 90%. That is amazing. Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can address that issue of efficiency in building design and operation. But let me turn to Pei-Yuan. Pei-Yuan, the big announcement coming out of China in the last few weeks was President Xi getting up and announcing that China is going to be carbon neutral by 2060. And, as China is the world's largest carbon emitter, obviously that's great news. But that goal is 40 years away. And when you look back at China's economy and development over the last 40 years, so much has changed. 40 years at China speed seems like a long time. And so my question is, how confident are you that China is going to achieve this goal? And frankly, is 40 years too long to wait?
Thank you, Michael. I think it's very good question. We are all very excited to see that China just make this announcement and make the commitment. I think this is an ambitious commitment, not just because it's just 40 years away, but if you compare China and other developed countries, China will meet the peak emission only in 2030. So it's just 30 years time from the peak to carbon neutrality. While if you compare other countries, particularly in the developed world, normally it takes around 50 years time. So it's quite a strong commitment. So of course, people will ask whether we can realize this goal. And for me, I'm confident and I'm quite optimistic. First of all, I think we raised the goal earlier enough so that we have 40 years. So 40 years seems quite far, but for commitment like this, I think it's not early. It's not quite early. I think it's the right time so that the whole society, including the business sector, NGO sector, we are on the same page and we keep this goal. And second, I think for some industry, particularly the industry of long term, for example, power plant, real estate. I think when you start building a factory, building a power plant, you need to consider, because this goal may impact the price of the energy, the price of carbon, etc. You need to keep it in mind. So I think this will change a lot of things. You need to keep all these things in mind when you make your investment. And the last point I want to make is that I'm confident because I think in China, one of the advantages is that the government are quite powerful in mobilizing resources. And I think our action against the COVID-19 is a good example for that. And poverty alleviation is another example. So this year we will eliminate poverty alleviation, the so-called SDG #1 goal. You can imagine for this carbon neutrality goal, I think the government will also break down these goals into provincial level and by sector, including the IT sector. I think they all have the sub-targets that they need to fulfill. So I think this is why I'm quite confident to say this will be met in 40 years' time.
You know, Pei, a follow-on question to that is, that when President Xi made the announcement, he made it quite clear in his remarks that really business is going to have to lead the way in transitioning to a low carbon economy. And one of the things that's going to be quite important, right, is the transparency and reporting on progress along the way. And so I'd like to ask you, with your view of the financial sector and corporate reporting and green finance, how do you see corporate reporting, especially around ESG and being transparent? How do you see that changing over the coming years and into the next decade?
I think I have two views on that. If you look at absolute number, I think Peter just mentioned that the disclosure rates and the level are not as good as we expect. And I think this is still the reality. So I think overall among Chinese A shares, maybe just around 30% of the company have this annual report. And some of the reports just tell you very nice looking story. So it's more like a storytelling other than tell you some material facts and data. So there's still quite some way to go. But on the other hand, if you look at the number of the past 10 years, then you will see a great progress have been made. So to give you a number that right now among the top 300 Chinese A-share company, we call it CSI 300, I think 10 years ago, there may be just 20 or 30% of this largest 300 company report this, their sustainability performance. But right now, among all these top 300, around 80 to 90% of this large company have their annual report. So I think the progress it's being made. So to summarize my point, I think we make some progress, but we still have a long way to go. And the policy and regulation will be quite critical. And again, I think a recent example for that is the Hong Kong Stock Exchange ESG reporting guide. It mandatorily asks the board to review the ESG target. And I think this is quite good. And this will drive a whole systematic change from the top-down level. And we should follow that way.
Good to see Hong Kong as a role model. Peter, you mentioned the partnership with SAP and also with 3M. And the UN Global Compact with Accenture, working on a program and a platform called SDG Ambition.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about how this program specifically is going to help companies accelerate their climate action, and what role do you see technology playing and possibly helping China deliver on this net zero vision for 2060?
Well, I think, so let's start by what is SDG Ambition. So SDG Ambition was founded by SAP and Accenture and the United Nations Global Compact. And so the Global Compact is the vehicle that the UN Secretary General uses to engage the private sector around delivering the Sustainable Development Goals to 2030. So it's about the business contribution to sustainability. And when Accenture and SAP decided to work with the Global Compact, we felt that it was an important contribution to delivering that business contribution, that we challenge ourselves, but as companies in general, to transform their organizations to be able to do well by also doing good in that context. The program at its heart is about setting ambitious sustainability targets on topics like climate change, on circular economy, energy, water, waste, but also right across the 17 SDGs, which includes environmental, social, and governance issues. And what I think both organizations and the UN see this being about and being different than other frameworks or platforms, to use your word, Michael, versus what's come before, is that this is going to be not just about frameworks for integrating into your operations, into your supply chain, marketing, etc., but to measure, to manage using that insight, and to be able to communicate and unquantify the impact as well as the business benefits of these sustainability areas, which is a very natural space for Accenture and SAP to be helping the UN and companies on. At the core of that transition, and it really is a transformation of the global economy, is recognizing that what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And that's at the level of everything from Pei-Yuan mentioning the Chinese central bank integrating finance and carbon risk and climate change into the way we look at global financial markets and GDP. But at the company level, that's about creating a sustainability ledger, if you like, alongside the financial ledger, to allow enterprise-wide companies to deliver against their ambitions, but in a coherent way. And it's a real maturing of the debate. I think it was an excellent point that was made a second ago, that a lot of corporate reporting on sustainability has been very flowery, lots of stories, lots of qualitative progress and impacts. And let's not be derogatory. That's fine. It's part of the story, but it's fine when it's built on real performance, measured, managed, communicated, assessed and compared to peers and other industries, so that we can really get underneath the skin of a new wave and a new definition of performance. Right? And so that's what SDG Ambition is about. I think it's a unique global program, and I say that carefully. Been working in this space for nearly 20 years, but in that focus on shifting it into enterprise systems and performance measurement management, I think it is unique. And I think, so to finish off, I think to your point, I think as Chinese companies, multinationals doing business in China, look to support the aggressive targets that are set, it is important, to your point, Michael, to remember 40 years is a very long time, and it's not very long at all when we're talking about the level of transformation that we mean. So what does that mean? It means that Chinese companies, international companies in China need to start now. And they need to be taking this seriously and measuring that and managing it from now, and breaking it down into actionable bite-sized chunks, 1-year plans, 3-year plans, 5-year plans, 2030 delivery of the SDG targets to help China on its way to the 2060 target. But without measurement, it's meaningless. So that's the heart of SDG Ambition and why it's useful to Chinese businesses.
That brings up a really great point, Peter. Thank you. It's, you know, one of our board members, Thomas Sauresig, used a financial analogy, and he said, you know, companies have been very focused on delivering their top line and bottom line, and it sounds like what you're trying to create with SDG Ambition is a new way of creating an ambition and bringing that sense of rigor and measurement into the organization. And, yeah. And it's what Thomas calls the green line.
I like it. Yeah. And we call it, so at the heart of my new role are two things that are about transforming Accenture and the services and solutions we provide to our clients. So here, Thomas's green line is what we would call 360-degree value. Okay. So both financial value, but also sustainability value. But just being very transparent, we also think this is a multi-billion-dollar source of new revenue, to bring the core of Accenture's business, and in partnership with our ecosystem, including SAP, to bring that to bear for clients. And we are very comfortable that this is about doing better business, but also doing better business and helping other companies to move the needle on their sustainability ambitions and their green line, to Thomas's point.
Megan, let's move to the agriculture sector for a little bit. As you know, agriculture plays a key role in climate action globally. Many parts of the world, North America, Europe, have moved to industrialized agriculture. And China and many parts of Asia are moving that direction now as well. So my question is, what opportunities do you see for food corporations like Cargill and others in this sector to help address the emissions issue and other sustainability issues, both at the large scale industrialized level, but as well as the developing smallholder level?
Yeah, sure. So if you don't mind, I'll actually speak first about the smallhold level, since that's where I focused my career and what's close to my heart. It's often overlooked because you may not get much impact per farm, let's say in terms of emissions, but the positive steps on all the small farms all over the world, they can and they will add up. So I personally think it's more challenging because you don't have as much control over day-to-day activities on these millions of smallhold farms all over the world, but there's still a lot of opportunity here. In this context, I would say you really have to look at input use, and that's like fertilizers, tree planting. Under the Cargill Cocoa Promise, which you mentioned I manage in Indonesia, we set up commercial partnerships with approved fertilizer companies, nurseries that grow appropriate seedlings to intercrop with cocoa trees. We typically leverage our own supply chain to improve access. So like our network of upcountry cocoa buyers, for example, will often become input suppliers as well. That brings convenience to the chain as well as reduced emissions. But even after we get the right products to the farmers, there's still a lot of training required, a lot of demonstration, coaching. And in the shorter term, when the farmer is taking a risk with new practices, we find there needs to be some additional financial incentive or support. So in our system, farmers who adhere to climate smart agriculture practices, which are usually defined by various third-party certifications, they receive a premium in addition to their market payment for their crop. I think this incentive piece is critical in both smallholder and in industrialized farming. So switching gears to industrialized agriculture, as you mentioned, larger farms do invite a higher degree of control and impact, but we honestly see a lot of the same challenges. For the sake of time, I can focus on soil health. This is particularly important for industrialized row crops, and it presents a huge opportunity. A hectare of land that incorporates soil health practices can sequester half-ton more carbon each year than one that doesn't. Those practices are typically referred to as regenerative agriculture, and include steps like optimizing fertilizer, as I mentioned with the smallholders, rotating diverse crops, and incorporating livestock grazing, among other things. Similar to smallholders, Cargill has partnerships in place to help industrial farmers take these steps, and we're on track to cover over 4 million hectares by 2030. So sticking with my car theme from earlier, that's 1.1 million cars off the road. That said, even if you provided the support, the incentives, and verified that the best practices were followed, we're going to go back to that benchmarking and that measurement piece that we've been talking about. You still don't know if you've done enough. This is where technology brings huge opportunities for both farming systems. Even in my work with smallholders, we have the capability to measure the amount of emissions that these thousands of individual farms are generating or reducing, and we can see where our weak points may lie. There's no reason that can't be done even more easily with industrialized agriculture. But then it's the adaptation and learning that has to happen. So in short, the opportunity lies beyond what I think of as box ticking exercises of implementing programs and measuring the progress, but rather goes forward into that continuous adaptation and improvement. That's where your real impact is going to come.
Outstanding. I'm glad you mentioned soil health and regenerative agriculture. That's a huge theme. And there was also a bit of a connection there because our signature CSR program in China is around helping rural farmers adopt more digital skills and technologies for digital farming, which obviously will help from a social perspective alleviate poverty, but also increase crop yields and not only use digital techniques, but we're also helping them think about regenerative agriculture techniques and so forth. So really important to kind of have the both digital and bringing more of the industrial approach, but also the natural-based solutions as well. Mm-hmm. And speaking of nature-based solutions, I definitely want to get a question over to Donald about that. But before I do, I want to ask Donald, as a CEO of a large development company and also as an architect, you certainly understand the power of design in the built environment and operations of large-scale buildings, which you've said are significant emissions in large cities, and also cities are large, complex systems, and they also account for a great deal of overall emissions in transport and so forth. But where do you see some challenges and possibly even outright design failures in building and industrial design when it comes to addressing climate action?
Well, I think the challenges really come from the need of a change of mindset. I think we need to ask the right questions. How can we work together to develop our city for resiliency and sustainability? How we can design our buildings for a low carbon economy and commit ourselves to a measurable outcome. When you talk about design mistake, I think if you look at a lot of the modern office building, it doesn't matter it is facing south, north, east, all the direction. We are all having the same curtain wall facade, which does not make sense. Obviously, we do have the technology to make the indoor climate comfortable, but that is actually wasting a lot of energies. we should use the passive design much more than the active design to ensure comfort. Again, we need to commit ourselves to a measurable outcome and actually set adequate targets for each corporation to achieve. For example, in China Camp, we have actually set ambitious and challenging targets that by 2030, our business operation will actually, for the reduction of CO2 emissions, it will be a target of reduction of 38% from the existing level, which is not easily done. But I do believe that working together and committing to it, we can achieve that. And that is not only by retrofitting and also ensuring that our new development look at these questions, but also developing new business model as well as collaboration. For example, green list to encourage our tenants also get on board with us together to save energy. At the present moment, since the tenant pay a management fee, and that include the AC costs already. So actually, it doesn't matter if they need it or not. A lot of the tenants will have their AC on, all the time at a very low temperature. So what we are trying to do with, the help of technology and big data is that we will be able to measure our baseline, and then any saving from that baseline, we will actually rebate, the cost to the tenant. So it's really a win-win situation where, we will be paying less utility bills, but also the tenant will actually get some financial benefit as well. And obviously, for the community, it has a great, energy reduction, and the CO2 emission will be reduced as well.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring around sort of this mindset approach, right? So that developers and designers often sort of their objective is to develop and build a building. And if you kind of use systems design thinking or collaborative approaches, your objective is to collaborate and build all the way through operations. And so you're involving potential tenants in the design process.
Yes.
And incorporating their requirements and objectives as well. And then even potentially building for retrofit and tear down and reuse. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I mentioned nature-based solutions, and I'd like to get your thoughts, because as I walk around downtown Hong Kong in the middle of summer, which is not always a pleasant experience, I look up at these giant, beautiful towers, this fantastic architecture, and it's glass towers all the way up, and there's no plant life. But if you spend a little time in Singapore and other places, you've got a lot of carbon sequestering and heat effect reducing plants around the built environment of major city centers. Why don't we have this in places like Hong Kong and in other city centers around the world?
Well, I think again, we are start to see, bringing in green element into the urban city more and more kind of acceptable and also being encouraged. Therefore, obviously, for Hong Kong, in this type of a high density city, where we build vertically, it's difficult to have horizontal green. But right now, I think, first of all, we will have multiple ground plane. So we have sky garden. Obviously, it's not very common yet, but it's a trend that we are encouraging in our city. But also another actually quite innovative use of green in a high density city like Hong Kong is the vertical green wall. And it is not just a small green wall put on the indoor. But now we are actually seeing vertical green wall actually on the exterior of the building, exterior facade. And it could actually, first of all, having a great effect on cooling down the microclimate around the building. But also it can serve as also, with the right design as an insulation to the building itself, also again lowering down the energy use of the building. So we are starting to see, this type of solution, and obviously, when people previously kind of avoid this type of insulation is because of the maintenance costs. But very often they just look at the initial capex and also the manpower that required to maintain it. But now with all the automation and when the life cycle costs are being calculated, then actually it also makes financial sense as well. So I do hope and there is evidence showing that this approach is more and more acceptable and being encouraged in Hong Kong.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. And you mentioned making financial sense. So let me transition to Pei Yuan and talk a little bit about finance. With the green finance kind of boom actually in China, Pei Yuan, we've seen an expansion of sustainable investing and green finance vehicles and instruments. And we've got a lot of development opportunity, both in China with the expanding domestic consumption mandates. And we've also got big programs like Belt and Road. So with this, growing volume of funds available, capital available, and momentum, where do you see some of the opportunities and the risks in the years ahead? And where do you see some big opportunities for companies to take advantage of this lower cost capital or deploying green capital?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think you're right that in the past 5 years, particularly after 2016, green finance or ESG become more and more popular. Now, if you catch a mutual fund manager, he or she will talk about ESG with you. So this, I think this is an ongoing trend, and definitely this trend is quite closely connected to the topic today, climate change. And as I mentioned, the central bank in China already working on the climate risk assessment and encourage the banks to consider the climate risk. And I think the approach now we're using, it's more it's based on the framework of the TCFD Task Force for of climate-related financial disclosure, because this work done by the Financial Stability Board of G20 laid down a basic framework to look at these issues, physical risk and transitional risk, if you look at the risk side. So we are trying to work with some banks as well to understand at the portfolio level, not transaction level, portfolio level, how their assets will be exposed to physical risk and transitional risk. So physical risk is more closely connected to extreme weather like typhoon, etc. Transitional risk is more closely connected to like the depreciation of the asset value because of the change of the policy. For example, in the automobile sector and in the energy sector, the government will definitely pay more attention to renewable energy, and this will put more risk to some traditional energy and traditional automobile company. And of course, the opportunities still are also there, because I think the bankers and the fund managers will talk about that quite a lot of new instruments, for example, green bond, and that many Chinese companies, actually, I think China last year is the biggest issuer of green bond of the world. So by issuing green bond, I think the bank, the company can find a way to access to lower cost capital, particularly through the European market. So I think there are some more instruments available to company, to industry as well.
Thank you, Pei Yuan. Peter, very quickly, you have mentioned about this partnership with SAP and targeting some companies around the world, but also in China. And beyond helping companies kind of re-examine, unpack their current SDG ambitions, and perhaps reset them for the decade ahead.
Mhm.
The aim, I think, of the program is to help them create kind of an implementation roadmap. And that's, of course, going to involve new innovation and new technology.
Yeah.
What kinds of companies do you envision sort of in the next couple of years working with, and what kind of implementation and technologies do you see them implementing?
Well, I think the previous speakers, I think, have done a really good job of illustrating some of the trends that we're seeing, and some of the shifts in markets and market forces, availability of capital, and then even specific sectors like building and construction and facilities management and these sorts of areas. I think what we're going to see is three phases and three segments of companies by industries, for example. I think we already know where a lot of the footprints lie in things like carbon and climate change. And, but I think the sectors, so the sectors that have already had the greatest footprint, the most material sectors, so oil and gas, electricity, automotive, those companies are ramping up quickly. And this, you could take away the word, I think Cargill probably the same in terms of agriculture. You could take away the word sustainability or responsible business. This is just core business now. This is their market. This is R&D. This is the product. This is the regulatory environment, etc. I think what you're starting to see is a second wave of industries that are maybe not as obviously and explicitly in the crosshairs of either the reality of the footprint or the physical challenge, but are now becoming far more engaged. So that might mean, for example, retail. So you see both physical and online retailers moving towards circular economy, thinking about take-back systems, thinking about reducing packaging, transit packaging, looking at how they engage with some of the suppliers and manufacturers to reduce their overall environmental footprint on things like circular economy. You see, I think you see banking, capital markets, insurance, all the things that were said previously by Payuan around things like risk and infrastructure. You see a lot of those businesses tailoring new markets. Bank of America, for example, globally, I was with Brian Moynihan, the CEO there, earlier in the year, and his assessment, his team's assessment to 2030 is that we're going to need $6 trillion a year in investment in sustainability, carbon, and also things like nature-based solutions, biodiversity, tackling biodiversity, deforestation. $6 trillion, of which about $1.5 trillion will come from government and not-for-profit. The rest, and it goes back to your point about what business needs to do, needs to come from the private sector. And the banking sector, capital markets, investment asset managers, insurers are going to have to be at the heart of the new products, the services, the injection of capital. And he himself committed $300 billion a year every year for green finance, sustainable finance, as an example. So I think those are moving. And then there are some industries, which I'm not going to name names, which probably need to do more and probably are a little further behind. Laggards is a tough term, but there are still some sectors out there that need to get their act together, frankly. So I think you'll see that in terms of leaders, fast followers and laggards like we see in other areas. But what I would say is that more and more industries as a whole are now seeing sustainability as a competitive axis, as one dimension of competitiveness and value creation. And it's interesting. You talked about Green Line. I talked about the 360-degree value approach. I think that sustainability set of issues and themes is becoming more material, not just to be able to report and be able to communicate your footprint on these issues and the impact that you have, positive or negative, and the progress you're making, but they're totally intertwined increasingly with financial value as well. And they are about growth, they are about cost, they are about risk profiles, they are about intangible asset values, and they can all be quantified. And so it's becoming, in and of itself, a competitive axis to see who's having the greatest impact positively on the planet or on people, but also it's becoming a shareholder value conversation. And that's where I think the industries are headed, and they're waking up. And as these themes become more and more central to policymaker regulatory lenses, more central to consumer behaviors, more central to employees and the war for talent, that is going to become ever more the case. So I think for me, the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years, I think if we had this conversation in 2025, I think we will already have a new era of competitiveness globally. And I think we will be having a very mature conversation by then in the quantification of that. And it will simply be another dimension upon which we compete for the best innovator, for the best product, for the best talent. We are going to, in all of the industries represented here and beyond, be competing to be the sustainability leader. That's our ambition at Accenture. We don't aspire to be a leader, we aspire to be the leader in the consulting and technology services sector.
No, I'm glad you mentioned Bank of America, because Brian and Anne Finucane certainly have taken the sustainability.
Anne's fantastic. She's done a brilliant job there. Yeah, for sure.
And since we've kind of come up at the end, it went by so fast. It's amazing. I guess I'll use them as an example of a global corporation that has really put sustainability down into their core business, right? And right at the top with Brian and Ann, you've got passionate leaders who demonstrably care, right? And so if we can just kind of quickly talk to the other panelists, that's my question, and then we'll close this out. But what do you see as the one leadership character that you need to see in this evolving business momentum going forward to truly be sustainable leaders? Megan, we'll start with you. What's that leadership character trait, that one thing that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I'd say the most important quality that a business leader in sustainability can have is an investment mindset. It's almost a bit entrepreneurial, right? Climate initiatives are urgent, but they also require long-term thinking and a lot of resources. So you can't really expect immediate return on investment, and you can't expect downstream supply chain actors and end consumers, to reward you for that. They consider that table stakes and even a business, basic license to operate. So our leaders need to understand that this is an investment, an important one, and we can't be measured, year on year by ROI, for example. And for action to take, leaders really should hold everyone in the business accountable for climate action. We spoke about this earlier. This, just like business can't do it alone, neither can one department or one function within a business, right? It's no one person's job. It comes from the top. It flows through everybody. Everyone has a role to play, and our leaders need to socialize and instill that across companies.
Thank you. Pei Yuan, what's the one leadership trait you'd like to see?
Thank you. I would say we need strategic and systematic thinking, because I think, as we discussed, we need to consider climate change as risk and also opportunity. If you look at the Paris Accord, it actually advocates mitigation, adaptation, and also transition to a more resilient economy. So resilience. So it's just not just one single action. Actually, you need to consider this more systematically. And this actually echoes to Megan's point that no one single function in the company can do the job. So as the CEO or the chairman or the top leader of the company, you need to consider how to mobilize the resources more comprehensively on the risk side and on the opportunity side, so that people not just see, okay, we are spending costs on that, expenditure on that, but we are also about investment, and we'll create our future revenue, etc., more opportunity or even a new market. So that's my idea.
Donald, we're going to finish with you. You're a passionate, sustainable leader. what do you think the most important leadership trait is going to be needed to take sustainable businesses forward?
Well, I think like any other leader, I think it's really need to have a team of similar-minded players to be alongside in the journey. And sustainability is such an important issue that it is not just any one corporation or personal effort. It really needs to obtain the consensus of the community that it is something very important. Therefore, the advocacy is important. So, by actually also walking the talk, I think that is important so that people see it. We are putting our money, our investment in what we believe in. And the benefit is not only to ourselves, but also to the whole community as well. So that, they can all come on board and join us together on this journey to ensure that we have a resilient future and, we do justice to our future generations.
Donald, thank you. And thank you all. We've got an investment mindset. We've got systematic and system-based thinking. We've got a great team and some passion. I hope that we can see more of this sustainable leadership as we go forward and really accelerate the role of business in addressing climate action and other sustainability issues. Thank you again, all. We're going to close this out. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate you spending your time with us. Fantastic insights and a great conversation.